In prehistoric life, old age looked like a weakness. An older person could slow the group down. They needed food, warmth, and protection, even when they could no longer run fast, hunt far, or carry heavy things. In a hard season, that should have made them a burden. But human beings did something strange. They kept listening to the people who had already survived many winters. They kept them near the fire. They kept their memories alive. So in a world where every mouth mattered, why did the oldest people still matter? After that question is asked, it is tempting to answer too quickly. It is tempting to say that old people mattered because they were wise, because they remembered things, because they helped children, or because they held the stories of the group. Some of that may be true, some of it may even be deeply important, but if we move too fast, we miss the colder part of the question. We miss the world in which old age first had to survive. Prehistoric life was not a gentle place designed around comfort. It was a world of walking long distances, watching the sky, listening for animals, finding food before hunger became dangerous, and staying warm when the night came down. In such a world, a body mattered. Strong legs mattered. Sharp eyes mattered. Quick reactions mattered. A young adult who could climb, carry, dig, run, hunt, gather, and protect a child gave something very visible to the group. The value of that person could be seen in movement. It could be seen in food brought back, wood carried, shelter repaired, danger avoided, and children lifted across difficult ground. But old age looked different. An older person might move more slowly. Their joints might ache after a cold night. Their hearing might fade. Their teeth might be worn down. Their hands might still know what to do, but the body might no longer obey as easily as it once did. In a small, prehistoric group, this was not a small detail. A group did not have endless supplies. It did not have a stored warehouse of food that could support everyone through every season. It did not have medicine in the modern sense, or heated rooms, or easy transport, or written instructions that could preserve knowledge after a person was gone. Every person lived inside the same narrow circle of effort. Food had to be found again and again. Fire had to be kept or remade. Children had to be watched. Weather had to be endured. A weak season could turn ordinary tiredness into danger. This is why the question matters. If survival was only a simple contest of strength, then old people would seem to stand on the losing side of the balance. They still needed food. They still needed warmth. They still took time, attention, and space. If the group moved, they moved with it, or the group had to decide what that meant. If a storm came, they needed shelter too. If hunger came, their hunger counted with everyone else's. From the outside, and especially from a modern imagination that often pictures prehistoric life as brutal and efficient, this looks like a harsh equation. Why keep someone close when that person can no longer do everything the young can do? Why share food with someone whose strongest years have already passed? Why listen to a slower voice when the world seems to reward speed? But human life, even in deep prehistory, was probably never only a matter of muscle. That does not mean it was soft. It does not mean every group acted kindly in every moment. It does not mean old age was always safe, respected, or protected. We should be careful here. Prehistory was long, varied, and mostly unwritten. Different groups lived in different climates, followed different animals, knew different plants, and faced different pressures. There was no single prehistoric village, no single rule, no single way every ancient human treated the old. But across the larger human story, something strange appears. Human beings became a species in which life often extended beyond the years of early reproduction and raw physical peak. The very existence of older adults asks us to look again at what survival really means. Perhaps a group was not only surviving through the people who could run the fastest, perhaps it was also surviving through the people who had already seen danger return in a familiar shape. Perhaps the value of an old person was not always loud enough to notice in one day, but could become clear across many seasons. For now, the important thing is not to solve the mystery. It is to feel the weight of it. In the first human worlds, an old person may have seemed, at first glance, like a body that had become less useful. Yet the group still had reasons, sometimes quiet and practical, to keep such a person near the fire. And that means the real question is not simply why old people survived. It is why human groups became the kind of groups in which old age could still have a place. To understand why old people mattered, we first have to understand why they might have seemed difficult to keep alive. This is the uncomfortable side of the question, and it should not be softened too much. In a small prehistoric group, care was never free. Food did not appear because someone needed it. Warmth did not stay through the night unless someone gathered fuel, watched the fire, repaired a shelter, or chose a place where the wind was weaker. Safety did not come from walls, locked doors, or stored supplies. It came from attention, movement, memory, and the shared effort of bodies that were often tired. Every person inside the group added something to that shared effort, but every person also needed something from it. A young child needed food and protection. A nursing mother needed support. An injured hunter needed time to heal. An older person whose strongest years had passed could also need more than they could visibly give back in a single day. This is where the question becomes sharp. In prehistoric life, old age was not only a symbol of experience, it was also a physical condition inside a difficult world. An older person might need softer food if their teeth were worn. They might need more time to rise in the morning after a cold night. They might not walk as far without pain. If the group had to move camp because animals had shifted, plants were no longer available, or water had become unreliable, the pace of the slowest bodies mattered. A group that moved too slowly could lose time, and time could mean food. A group that moved too quickly could leave its weaker members behind, and that choice carried its own cost, not only practical but social. We cannot know how every ancient group faced such moments. Some choices may have been hard. Some may have been shaped by hunger, climate, distance, injury, or conflict. But the burden itself was real enough to make the survival of older adults worth thinking about. Food was one part of it. A person who could not always gather, hunt, dig, or carry still needed calories. In a season when roots were scarce, game was difficult, or cold weather burned energy from everybody, sharing food with someone older was not a small gesture. It meant that food moved from one mouth to another inside a group where children, pregnant women, skilled adults, and the sick might all need it too. Warmth was another part. At night, an older body may have suffered more from cold, stiffness, and exhaustion. Keeping someone warm could mean giving them a better place near the fire, a closer place inside a shelter, or more attention when the air turned dangerous. Protection was part of the cost as well. An older person who saw poorly, heard less clearly, or moved slowly might be more vulnerable in rough terrain or in a moment of alarm. They might need someone to notice them, wait for them, guide them, or make space for them. None of this means old people were helpless. That would be too simple, and probably false in many cases. Many older people in small-scale societies can remain active, skilled, observant, and useful for a long time. But the central point is that their value was not always obvious in the same way as the strength of a young adult. A young adult could return with meat, carry a child, break branches, climb a slope, or cross a stream with visible power. The older person's cost, by contrast, could be seen every day in the small demands of food, time, warmth, and movement. This makes the prehistoric question deeper, not smaller. If a group still made room for older adults, it was not because life was easy. It was not because food had no value. It was not because weakness did not matter. It was because the group's idea of value may have been wider than immediate physical output, but we should not rush there yet. Before we speak of memory, wisdom, teaching, or care, we have to sit with the harder image, an older person beside the fire, eating from the same limited food, needing the same warmth, moving with the same group, while younger bodies carried the visible weight of survival. In that image, the mystery becomes clearer. The oldest people mattered in prehistoric life only if they gave something back that was not always easy to measure at the end of one day. The first mistake would be to imagine that usefulness in prehistoric life had only one shape. A strong body was useful. A fast body was useful. A body that could lift, carry, climb, dig, gather, hunt, and endure long travel was clearly useful. No one living close to hunger could ignore that. But human groups were never made only of the strongest moment in a person's life. They were made of babies who could not feed themselves, children who had to learn slowly, mothers and fathers who became exhausted, injured people who needed time, and older people whose bodies no longer moved with the same force. If such a group survived at all, it had to measure value in more than one way. This does not make prehistoric life gentle. It only makes it human. An old person may not have been able to outrun danger, but perhaps survival was not always decided by running. An old person may not have been the one who walked farthest in a hunt, but perhaps survival was not always decided by the farthest walk. There were many hours in an ancient day when the group was not chasing an animal or escaping a threat. There were quiet hours of sorting food, watching children, noticing changes in weather, recognizing a safe path, remembering where water had once remained when other streams dried, or knowing which kind of silence in the forest felt ordinary and which kind did not. These were not dramatic skills. They did not look like strength from a distance. They did not leave behind clear marks in stone for us to study thousands of years later. Yet in prehistoric life, small recognitions could matter. A young person might see a valley for the first time. An older person might remember that the same valley had been empty in one season and generous in another. A young person might trust the first edible-looking plant they found. An older person might remember that a similar plant had made someone sick long ago. A young person might feel only the cold of tonight. An older person might notice the kind of wind that often came before worse weather. None of this requires us to invent a perfect wise elder who always knew the answer. Real old people, then as now, would have been varied. Some would have remained strong and active. Some would have been fragile. Some may have been deeply respected. Others may have been ordinary, difficult, quiet, stubborn, loved, ignored, or needed in different ways. But even with all that variation, old age carried one thing that youth could not rush into being: time already lived. That time did not automatically become wisdom, but it could become memory. It could become familiarity with repeated seasons, repeated dangers, repeated mistakes, and repeated recoveries. In a world without writing, without maps, without stored records, a living memory was not a decoration. It was one possible way for a group to keep parts of its past from disappearing. This is why the question of old people in prehistoric life cannot be answered by looking only at muscle. Muscle helps a person act in the present. Memory can help a group compare the present with what has happened before. Muscle can bring food back today. Memory can warn that today looks like the beginning of a hungry season. Muscle can carry wood to the fire. Memory can recall which wood smokes badly, which burns longer, or where dry branches may be found after rain. We should still be careful. Archaeology rarely allows us to hear the exact words of an old hunter, an old gatherer, or an old grandmother sitting near a fire. We cannot point to one bone and say, with certainty, here is the moment when an elder saved the group through advice. But the broader pattern of human life invites the question: why would a species like ours, so dependent on learning, childhood, cooperation, and shared knowledge, treat age only as decline? Perhaps the old mattered because a human group was not simply a collection of working bodies, it was a moving memory. It carried roots, seasons, warnings, habits, and small corrections from one generation into the next. The oldest people may have stood near the edge of physical strength, but they also stood near the deep edge of the group's remembered life. And so, before we ask what old people did, we have to ask what a prehistoric group would lose if every long memory disappeared. A young body and an old memory do not solve the same problem. This may be one of the first quiet lessons hidden inside the question of old people in prehistoric life. A young adult could give the group strength in the present moment. They could walk farther in one day. They could climb more easily, carry more weight, react faster to danger, and recover sooner after cold, hunger, or injury. Their usefulness could be seen almost at once. If wood had to be carried, they carried it. If a child had to be lifted, they lifted the child. If food was found in a difficult place, they could reach it. In a world without machines, strength was not an idea, it was a daily tool. But memory worked differently. Memory did not always look useful at first glance. It did not shine like a spear point or move like a young hunter crossing open ground. It lived inside a person quietly. It was built from many days that seemed ordinary when they happened. A strange winter, a dry stream, a plant that appeared after fire, a path that became dangerous after rain, a child who once became sick after eating the wrong route, a place where animals passed only when the air cooled. These were small pieces of experience, and none of them by itself looked like power. But in prehistoric life, a group did not only face one day, it faced the return of days. It faced seasons that changed, animals that moved, plants that ripened and vanished, rivers that rose and shrank, and dangers that did not always announce themselves clearly. The young could learn quickly, but they had not yet lived through many cycles. They could see what stood in front of them, but they could not yet compare it with 20, 30, or 40 years of remembered change. An older person could not control the weather. They could not promise food. They could not make danger disappear. But they might carry a longer pattern of what the world had done before. That difference matters because prehistoric survival was not only about force, it was also about recognition. To recognize a place was different from merely seeing it. To recognize a season was different from merely feeling cold. To recognize a risk was different from being frightened. A young person might look at a patch of land and see grass, stones, and trees. An older person might see that the grass was thinner than usual, that the birds were quieter, that the tracks were old, or that a familiar source of food had failed. Perhaps they were wrong sometimes. Memory is not magic. Old age does not make every judgment true. But a long memory gives a person more past moments to compare with the present. In a world without writing, that comparison could not be stored in a book. It had to remain inside living people. This is one reason the old may have mattered in ways that were difficult to count. A young body could bring back something that everyone could see. An old memory could prevent a mistake that no one would ever notice because the danger never happened. If an elder warned the group not to sleep too close to a certain floodplain, and the flood came later, the value of that memory became clear. If the flood did not come, the warning might seem unnecessary. This is the quiet problem with experience. It often works by changing what people do before harm arrives. Prehistoric life left us stones, bones, ashes, tools, and traces of places where people once lived. It did not leave us the full sound of advice spoken beside a fire. It did not record the moment when an older voice said, "Not this way, not tonight, not that plant, not this water, so we have to be careful." We cannot fill the silence with invented scenes and call them fact, but we can understand the larger human pattern. A species that depends heavily on learning may also depend on people who have had more time to learn. A child becomes useful slowly. A skilled adult becomes strong through practice. An older person becomes valuable, when they are valuable, through the long accumulation of what has already happened. The young body answers the needs of now. The old memory asks whether now has appeared before. A long memory mattered most in places where the world did not explain itself clearly. A stream could look generous in one season and disappear in another. A patch of plants could feed people for a few weeks, then become useless until the next year. A hillside could seem safe in dry weather, then become dangerous after heavy rain. To a young person, these things might appear as separate moments. This place has water, this tree has fruit, this path is open, this weather feels cold. But an older person, if they had lived in that landscape for many years, might carry the memory of how those moments were connected. They might remember that the stream did not fail all at once, but slowly, after a certain kind of dry wind. They might remember that one kind of berry ripened before another, or that a root was easier to find when the leaves above it had already changed color. They might remember that animals came through a valley only when the ground softened, or that a rocky shelter stayed warmer than an open hollow when the night wind turned. These memories were not dramatic. They were not the kind of knowledge that makes a sudden story. But prehistoric survival often depended on quiet knowledge that had been collected over many ordinary days. A young person could have sharp eyes and still not know what mattered yet. They could see tracks, but not know whether they were fresh enough to follow. They could see clouds, but not know whether they meant a passing change or a dangerous shift. They could find a plant, but not know whether it was useful, bitter, poisonous, seasonal, or only safe after careful preparation. In a world without written lists, without calendars, without maps, and without stored instructions, knowledge had to live in bodies and voices. It had to be carried by people who had watched the same places change again and again. This is where the old may have mattered in a way that strength alone could not replace. They did not need to be stronger than the young to be useful. They needed to remember what the young had not yet had time to learn. A group moving across a familiar territory was not simply walking through space, it was walking through layers of remembered seasons. One person might know where water had remained during a dry year. Another might know where a certain plant appeared after fire. Someone else might remember a place where insects, birds, or animal tracks often hinted at food nearby. These details may sound small from far away, but small details become large when hunger is near. A mistake about water can become a day of weakness. A mistake about food can make children sick. A mistake about timing can mean reaching a place too early, before the useful plants have ripened, or too late, after animals have moved on. Older people, because they had lived through more cycles, could help the group compare what was happening now with what had happened before. This did not make them perfect guides. Memory can fade. People can misread signs. An older person could be wrong, just as a young person could be brave and right. Prehistoric life should not be turned into a simple picture where every elder is wise and every young person is foolish. But age gave one advantage that youth could not imitate quickly: repeated exposure to the same living world. The young had energy for the present. The old could sometimes place the present inside a longer pattern. That longer pattern may have helped a group decide when to move, where to rest, what to gather, what to avoid, and how much risk to take. The value of such knowledge would not always be visible. If an older voice helped the group avoid bad water, there might be no great event to remember later. People would simply not get sick. If an old memory led them toward a safer route, there might be no story of rescue, only a quieter journey. This is one reason old people mattered in prehistoric life, not because they always did more with their bodies, but because they may have helped the group lose less through avoidable mistakes. In a hard world, avoiding the wrong place could be as important as finding the right one. And perhaps, near the fire at night, the oldest people were not only remembering the past, they were helping the group recognize tomorrow before it arrived. Before writing, before carved symbols, before a group could leave instructions for people not yet born, memory had to remain alive in human beings. This is one of the quietest and most important differences between an object and a person. A stone tool can remain on the ground long after the hand that shaped it is gone. A bone can remain in the earth. Ash can mark an old fire, but a warning, a route, a story about a dry season, or the memory of a place where children once became sick cannot survive by itself. It needs a living mind. It needs someone who was there, or someone who heard it carefully from another person. In this way, older people may have served as a kind of living archive, not in the modern sense of books, records, or perfect facts, but in the older human sense of remembered experience. They could carry fragments of what the group had already faced. They might remember a winter that came early, a time when animals changed their path, a spring when water returned late, or a place that seemed safe until something went wrong. These memories did not need to be dramatic to matter. Many of the most useful memories in prehistoric life were probably small, where the ground stayed dry after rain, which trees gave shade in the hottest part of the day, which stones made better edges, which plants should be left alone, which valley carried sound strangely at night, which place looked empty but often held tracks at dawn. Such knowledge was not separate from survival. It was survival made slow, repeated, and shared. A young person could learn some of it by direct experience, but direct experience has a cost. To learn every danger by being harmed is a dangerous way to grow. To learn every bad plant by eating it, every unsafe path by walking it, every poor shelter by sleeping there, and every dry place by arriving thirsty would be wasteful and sometimes fatal. A group that could pass experience forward did not have to let every generation begin from nothing. This may be one reason old people mattered. They allowed the group's past to speak into the group's present. But this should not be imagined as formal teaching in the modern sense. There may not have been lessons, classrooms, or speeches. Much of the learning may have happened through ordinary closeness, a child watching an older hand choose one route and reject another, a young adult hearing a quiet correction before taking a path, a tired group listening when someone said that a certain place had failed them before, around a fire, during travel, while preparing food, while watching children. Knowledge could move from one person to another without ever becoming a grand event. That is why it is so easy to miss. Archaeology can find the tool, but not always the remembered instruction behind the tool. It can find the hearth, but not the voice that told a child where to sit safely near it. It can find traces of movement, but not always the old memory that helped decide the route. The old person as a living archive was not a perfect library. Memories can change. People can forget. Stories can grow, shrink, or become confused. Some older people may have remembered clearly. Others may not. Some knowledge may have been held by skilled younger adults as well. We should never reduce all wisdom to age alone. Still, age increased the chance of having witnessed more cycles, more mistakes, more recoveries, and more rare events. Rare events matter because the young may never have seen them before. A severe drought, an unusual animal movement, a strange illness after eating something unfamiliar, or a sudden change in weather might come only once in many years. When it returned, the group that had someone old enough to remember it had something the group of only young people might lack. Not certainty, but comparison, not control, but recognition. In that sense, an older person could hold a part of the group that could not be carried in a basket or tied to a spear. They carried time, and in prehistoric life, time already lived may have been one of the most fragile resources a human group possessed. Hunger changes the meaning of knowledge. In an easy season, when berries are visible, animals are moving nearby, water is clear, and the air is mild, many people can seem equally capable. The young can gather quickly. Strong adults can travel far. Children can learn through play and imitation. The group may still work hard, but the world gives enough signs for ordinary effort to succeed. A person does not need to remember a disaster in order to pick ripe fruit from a branch in front of them. But a hard season is different. When cold lingers too long, when familiar plants do not return on time, when animals move away, when streams shrink, or when snow covers the ground, the present becomes harder to read. The world no longer offers its answers openly. This is when the memory of someone who had survived earlier hardship could become more important. Not because an older person could make food appear, not because they had a secret power over winter, but because they may have seen something like this before. In prehistoric life, hunger was not an abstract problem. It was a slow pressure on the body. It made walking harder. It made children quieter. It made small disagreements sharper. It made every decision feel heavier because each mistake used energy that could not easily be replaced. A group facing hunger had to decide whether to stay near a familiar place or move toward uncertain ground. They had to decide whether a weak food source was worth the effort, whether a shelter was safe enough for another night, whether the weather would worsen, whether children and older bodies could handle a longer journey. These were not decisions of strength alone. A strong body could walk in the wrong direction. A fast runner could chase animals that had already shifted away. A skilled gatherer could arrive at a place too late. In a season of scarcity, the question was not only who could work hardest, it was who could help the group choose carefully before strength was wasted. An older person who had lived through many seasons might remember that hunger often came in patterns. Perhaps a dry period had once pushed animals toward lower ground. Perhaps a certain route remained edible when surface plants failed. Perhaps a sheltered valley kept snow thinner. Perhaps a place that looked empty in ordinary times became useful only when other places had failed. These details are not heroic, but they are exactly the kind of details that could matter when food was scarce. The value of such memory would be easy to underestimate, because it did not always create a dramatic rescue. It might only lead to a slightly better camp, a shorter walk, a safer choice, or one more source of food that younger people had not yet learned to trust. Yet survival in deep prehistory may often have depended on these slight differences: a little less wasted movement, a little more caution, a little more memory about what happened last time the season turned strange. We should still be careful not to romanticize this. Not every old person would have known the right answer. Not every group would have listened. Hunger can make people harsh, and prehistoric life was too varied for one simple rule. But the basic logic remains powerful. A person who had survived a previous hungry season carried evidence that survival had once been possible. Their body itself was a record. The lines in their face, the slowness in their step, the old scars, the habits that looked overly cautious to the young, all of these may have belonged to someone who had already passed through danger and come out the other side. For a young person, a severe winter or a failed food season might feel like the end of the known world. For someone older, it might feel terrifying, but not entirely new. That difference matters. Fear becomes different when it has memory beside it. A group with only young bodies might have courage, speed, and hunger for action. A group with older memory might also have a quieter question. What did we do the last time the world became this hard? In prehistoric life, that question may have been one of the first forms of planning. It did not require writing. It did not require numbers. It required someone who had remained alive long enough to remember that hardship had a shape, that seasons could return, and that the worst days were not always the final days. This is where old age begins to matter in a colder way. Not as a symbol of respect, but as a witness to survival itself. In a hard season, survival was not only about finding food, it was also about not wasting the little strength the group still had. This is where experience could become almost invisible, because the wisest decision might be the one that prevented effort from being lost. A young person, full of urgency, might want to keep moving, keep searching, keep pushing farther across the land. That impulse could be useful. Without energy, a group could not explore, hunt, gather, or escape danger. But when hunger and cold pressed on every body, movement itself became a cost. A long walk in the wrong direction could weaken children. A climb toward a poor shelter could leave everyone colder. A night spent in a windy place could steal more strength than a day of careful walking. In such moments, an older person who had lived through earlier difficult seasons might not offer speed, but they might offer restraint. They might remember that a sheltered hollow was colder than it looked because damp air stayed there after sunset. They might remember that a cave entrance facing one direction held wind badly, while a rock overhang nearby stayed drier. They might remember that a certain path became dangerous after rain, not because it looked dangerous in daylight, but because loose stones shifted under tired feet. None of these memories would sound grand. They were not the kind of knowledge that belongs to legends. They were the small corrections that helped a group survive without spending more strength than necessary. In prehistoric life, conserving energy could be as important as using it. A body can endure only so much cold, hunger, and travel before judgment begins to weaken. People who are tired make mistakes. They choose poorly. They become impatient. They overlook details. Children stumble more. Adults argue more easily. The group's protection begins to thin, not because anyone has stopped caring, but because every person is running on less. An older person may have understood this rhythm, not through theory, but through having felt it before. They may have known that pushing one more hill before dark could cost more than waiting. They may have known that dry fuel gathered early could save trouble later, or that repairing a rough shelter before the cold deepened was better than trying to fix it with numb hands. They may have known that some risks were not worth taking when the group was already weak. This kind of caution can look like fear to the young. It can look slow. It can look like hesitation. But caution is not always weakness. In a world where one injury could change a person's life, avoiding risk was a serious skill. A twisted ankle, an infected cut, a fall on wet stone, a night of exposure, or food taken from the wrong place could affect more than one person. It could affect the whole group, because everyone depended on everyone else. When an older voice warned against crossing a swollen stream, the warning may not have sounded heroic. It may have sounded like delay. But if that delay kept a child from being swept away, or kept an adult from breaking a leg, then the value of the old person's memory became part of the group's survival. The difficulty is that avoided danger often leaves no clear trace. Archaeology may find bones that show injury or healing, but it cannot easily find the many injuries that never happened because someone was careful. It cannot show us the route not taken, the bad shelter avoided, the risky climb postponed, or the food left untouched because someone remembered harm. So the value of older people may often have lived in absence. No sickness, no fall, no wasted journey, no night spent in the worst possible place. We should not imagine that the old always decided for the group. Prehistoric groups likely had many voices, and leadership may have shifted with task, age, skill, and circumstance. But old age could add a particular kind of weight to a decision. It carried the memory of consequences. It knew that the land did not forgive every mistake. It knew that survival was not only the courage to move, but also the patience to stop. During hard seasons, that patience may have been one of the quiet reasons old people still mattered. Nature rarely warned prehistoric people in clear language. It did not say when a season would turn harsh. It did not announce which valley would hold water longer, which herd would shift away, or which cold night would become dangerous. The land spoke through signs, and many of those signs were easy to miss. A change in wind, a silence among birds, tracks that appeared farther from water than usual, plants ripening too early or too late, smoke falling low instead of rising, a familiar animal becoming scarce. To someone young, these might have seemed like separate details. To someone older, they might have formed a pattern. This is one of the quiet powers of age in prehistoric life. The old did not need to overpower nature. No human body, young or old, could truly do that. They could not stop winter, command rain, or keep animals from moving. But a person who had lived through many seasons might begin to recognize the way change returned. The world was never exactly the same twice, yet it was not completely random either. Cold came in different forms, but cold had habits. Hunger arrived for different reasons, but hunger also had early shadows. Animals moved unpredictably, but not without relation to weather, water, plants, and pressure. An older person may have carried a memory of these relations. They might not have explained it in the way a modern scientist would. They might not have had measurements, written calendars, or abstract theories. Their knowledge may have been practical, bodily, and local. This wind has come before. This dryness feels familiar. This place looks safe, but once it failed us. That kind of recognition could guide a group before danger became obvious. Speed helps when danger has already arrived. Pattern helps when danger is still forming. This difference matters deeply. A young hunter might react quickly when an animal runs. A young gatherer might climb swiftly toward food. A strong adult might carry more wood before night. These were real strengths. But an older person might notice that the group should not be in that place by night at all. They might sense that a path, a camp, or a decision had the shape of an old mistake. In prehistoric life, such recognition may have saved energy and reduced risk in ways no one could easily count. If the group avoided a poor campsite, there was no dramatic story of rescue. If they moved before a place failed, there was no moment when everyone could point and say, "Here is the value of the elder." If they prepared sooner, because an older person remembered the signs of a difficult season, survival looked like ordinary caution. This is why old people could matter without appearing powerful. Their contribution may have been folded into the group's decisions, hidden inside choices that seemed simple after they were made. Of course, we must be careful not to turn this into a perfect picture. Older people were not living weather instruments. They could misread signs. They could cling to old habits when the world had changed. A memory from one place might not apply to another. A younger person might sometimes see more clearly because they were less tied to what had happened before. Human groups probably needed both kinds of awareness, the young eye that notices what is new and the old memory that recognizes what is returning. But the presence of older adults gave the group another layer of time. Without them, the group still had strength, hunger, courage, and learning. With them, it might also have comparison. That comparison was especially important because prehistoric people lived inside environments that changed slowly and suddenly at the same time. A landscape could seem stable for many days, then become difficult through drought, cold, migration, illness, or storm. The people who had lived longest had the greatest chance of having seen those turns before. They were not valuable only because they remembered facts. They were valuable because they could connect signs. They could hold the shape of past seasons beside the uncertainty of the present. Near the fire, their slower voices may have carried more than stories. They may have carried warnings without panic, caution without surrender, and a sense that the world, however harsh, had patterns that could be learned. In that sense, old people mattered because they helped the group see that survival was not only movement. Sometimes survival was recognition. Sometimes it was the ability to look at an ordinary day and feel quietly that it had begun to resemble a day from long ago. A prehistoric child did not grow into an adult by learning from one person alone. This is important because when we imagine ancient life too quickly, we may picture only a mother, a father, and a child, as if survival knowledge passed through a narrow line. But human children are not built that way. They learn slowly, for many years, and they learn from many eyes around them. A young child watches hands before understanding words. They copy how adults hold a tool, how they sit near fire, how they follow a path, how they stay close when the group moves, how they react to an unfamiliar sound in the dark. They learn by being corrected, by being warned, by being included in small tasks, and by seeing the same actions repeated until the body begins to remember them. In a small prehistoric group, parents mattered deeply, but parents could not be the only teachers all the time. A mother might be gathering, nursing another child, preparing food, carrying something, or recovering from birth. A father might be away, watching animals, shaping tools, helping move camp, or doing work that required distance and attention. Other adults could help, but they too had immediate pressures. This is where older people may have mattered in a quiet and practical way. An older person who no longer moved as far or as fast might still remain close to children for longer stretches of the day. They might watch them near the fire, keep them away from sharp tools, show them which small objects were safe to touch, or simply notice when a child wandered too far. This kind of care does not look dramatic, but in prehistoric life, keeping children alive was not a small task. Human childhood is unusually long compared with many other animals. A child needed years to become fully useful, years to learn the landscape, the foods, the dangers, the tools, the social rules, and the timing of ordinary life. That long childhood was costly, but it also allowed learning to become deep. Old people may have helped make that long learning possible. They did not need to teach in formal lessons. They may have taught by presence. A child sitting beside an older person could hear the names of plants, the memory of places, the reason not to touch something, the reason to wait before eating, the reason to keep distance from an animal, the reason to listen when the group became quiet. Even a simple correction could carry generations of experience. Do not go there. Hold it this way. Wait until it cools. That one is not food. Stay where I can see you. These small warnings could protect a child from having to learn every danger through injury. In this way, an older person's value was not only in what they remembered, but in who received that memory. A memory that remains only inside one mind dies with that person. A memory shared with a child becomes part of the future group. This is one of the deepest reasons children matter to the question of old age. The old and the young stood at opposite ends of visible strength. One had not yet become strong. The other may have moved beyond their strongest years, yet together they formed a bridge across time. The child had years ahead, but little experience. The elder had experience behind them, but fewer years ahead. When they sat together, the group's past could reach toward its future. We should not make this too sentimental. Prehistoric childhood was not a soft modern childhood. Children likely helped when they could, learned through effort, faced danger, and experienced loss. Older people were not always gentle teachers, and not every elder would have had the same patience, skill, or status. But the structure of human life makes the connection powerful. A species with long childhoods needs more than food. It needs protected time for learning. It needs repeated examples. It needs adults and elders who can pass on not just strength, but habits, warnings, and meanings. In that sense, old people mattered because children could not become fully human alone. They had to inherit a world that someone older had already learned how to read. Teaching in prehistoric life may not have looked like teaching at all. It may have looked like an older person sitting close enough to watch, close enough to correct, and patient enough to repeat what younger people had not yet learned. A child did not need a formal lesson to learn where to place their feet near a fire. They did not need a speech to understand that some stones cut better than others, that some plants should be handled carefully, or that a sleeping baby should be kept away from smoke. Much of human learning happens through attention. A child watches, a child copies, a child fails, and someone older makes the movement slower, clearer, safer. In prehistoric life, this kind of slow teaching may have mattered because many useful skills could not be learned in a single moment. A young person might see an adult scrape a hide, shape a tool, gather roots, tie fibers, sort dry wood, or prepare food near the fire. But seeing once is not the same as knowing. The hand must learn pressure. The eye must learn difference. The body must learn timing. A sharp edge can break if struck wrongly. A plant can be useful in one stage and harmful in another. A piece of wood can smoke too much, burn too quickly, or fail when damp. These are not grand mysteries, but they are exactly the kinds of details that make daily survival possible. Older people, especially those whose bodies no longer carried them far each day, may have had more time near the center of camp to notice these learning moments. They could show a child how to hold something without cutting themselves. They could point out why one seed, root, shell, or bone was chosen and another left behind. They could slow a task down until the learner could see it. This slowness matters. The young often learn through energy. The old may teach through reduction, by removing unnecessary movement, by showing what not to do, by making the familiar visible. A skilled older hand may no longer be the strongest hand, but it may still know the shortest motion, the safest grip, the quieter way to do a thing. Around children, such knowledge could be passed without ceremony. A small correction, a repeated gesture, a remembered warning, a story told not to entertain, but to place a danger inside memory before the child meets it alone. Storytelling itself may have been one way, experience traveled across time, though we should be careful not to imagine every prehistoric night as a dramatic circle of legends. More often, the story may have been simple. Someone once ate that and became sick. Someone crossed there after rain and fell. We waited too long one year, and the animals had gone. These short memories could become part of a child's caution. They allowed the young to borrow the elder's past before having a past of their own. That is a powerful thing in a world where one mistake could matter. Older people may also have helped children learn social life, not only practical survival. A group is not held together by food alone. A child had to learn when to be quiet, when to share, when to stay close, when not to touch another person's tool, when to listen, when to wait, and how to read the mood of adults. These rules may have been different from group to group, and we cannot reconstruct them in detail. But every human group needs ways for children to become members of that group. Older people, because they had lived through many relationships, conflicts, births, deaths, and movements, may have helped children understand the rhythm of belonging, not through commands alone, but through daily presence. They could be the ones who noticed small missteps before they became larger trouble. They could remind, repeat, soften, or correct. Again, this does not mean every elder was patient or kind. Some may have been stern, some may have been ignored, some may have been too weak or ill to teach much at all. But when older adults were present and able, their nearness to children may have changed the way knowledge moved. Parents gave life and daily care. Strong adults gave protection and work. Older people could give something that required time, the slow transfer of remembered practice. In prehistoric life, a child did not only need to survive today, they needed to become someone who could help the group survive later. And for that, the quiet teaching of old people may have mattered more than anyone could measure in a single day. A child in prehistoric life did not only need food, food kept the body alive, but it did not teach the child how to live. This difference matters because human survival has never been only a matter of filling the stomach. A child could be fed and still remain helpless. In the deeper sense, they had to learn where to stand, what to touch, what to fear, what to ignore, when to follow, when to wait, how to read the faces of others, and how to understand the land around them. In a prehistoric group, the world was full of meanings that were not obvious at first sight. A fire was warmth, but also danger. A stream was water, but also a place where the ground might be slippery, where animals might come, or where sickness might begin if the water was bad. A forest edge could offer shade, food, and materials, but it could also hide movement. A quiet animal could be harmless, or it could be warning the group that something else had changed. A child had to learn these differences slowly. They were not born knowing the world. They had to be taught how to notice it. This is where older people may have mattered in a way that goes beyond care. To feed a child is to help them survive today. To teach a child how to look at the world is to help the group survive tomorrow. An older person could help turn ordinary seeing into recognition. They could help a child understand that not every green plant is food, not every open place is safe, not every silence is peaceful, and not every fear should lead to running. These lessons may have been given through words, gestures, expressions, or repeated examples. They may have been given while walking, resting, preparing food, sorting materials, or sitting near the fire when the day became quiet. The child might not have understood everything at once. That is the nature of childhood. A warning repeated many times may seem small until the day it prevents harm. A story about a dangerous plant may seem boring until the child sees that plant alone. A correction about fire may feel irritating until the child grows old enough to protect someone younger. In this way, older people could help children inherit not only information, but attention. Attention is one of the oldest tools human beings have. Before a child could make a sharp stone edge, before they could track an animal, before they could carry heavy wood, they had to learn where their attention belonged. They had to learn which details mattered. A young child might notice color, movement, hunger, curiosity, or fear. An older person might guide that attention toward pattern. Look at the tracks, listen to the birds, stay near the group, watch how the smoke moves. Do not rush with sharp things. Wait until the food is ready. These are simple instructions, but simple instructions shape a mind over time. They build the inner habits that later become judgment. We should not imagine prehistoric children as passive. They likely explored, played, imitated, made mistakes, helped when they could, and learned from one another as well as from adults. Nor should we imagine older people as the only teachers. Parents, siblings, cousins, skilled adults, and the whole group would have shaped a child's learning. But older people may have carried a special place in this shared teaching because they stood closer to the long memory of the group. They could connect the child's small action to something that had happened before. A child reaching toward a root was not just reaching toward a root. In the mind of an older person, it might recall an illness, a past warning, a season when that root helped, or a time when it should be avoided. That connection between the child's present and the elder's past is important. It means the child did not have to meet the world as if no one had ever lived before. They could grow inside a net of remembered care. This may be one of the quiet reasons old people mattered so much in prehistoric life. They helped children become more than fed bodies. They helped them become observers, listeners, rememberers, and future carriers of the group's knowledge. A child who learned to see the world carefully could one day teach another child to do the same. In that slow movement from old eyes to young eyes, the group's knowledge did not end with one generation. It kept breathing. One of the most careful ways to think about old people in prehistoric life begins with grandmothers, but not in the sentimental way we usually imagine them now. The question is not simply whether grandmothers were loved, respected, or surrounded by children near the fire. The colder question is whether an older woman, no longer having young children of her own, could still change the survival of the children already born into the group. This idea is often called the grandmother hypothesis. It does not say that every prehistoric grandmother was gentle, wise, or central to every decision. It does not say that all older women lived long lives, or that all groups treated them the same way. It suggests something more practical and more interesting, that in a species with long childhoods, slow learning, and children who needed many years of care, an older woman might still help her family line by helping grandchildren survive. A young mother in prehistoric life carried heavy demands. She might be nursing. She might be recovering from pregnancy or birth. She might need to gather food, move with the group, watch older children, and protect a baby at the same time. A small child could not feed itself fully. A toddler could not understand every danger. An older child might help, but still needed guidance. In this crowded pressure of care, a grandmother could matter not because she replaced the mother, but because she widened the circle around the child. She might help watch a young child while the mother gathered food. She might bring back plant foods, roots, shellfish, insects, or other resources depending on the environment. She might prepare food so that children could eat more safely. She might notice when a child was too close to the fire, too near the water, or wandering toward a place where adults were not watching. None of these acts looks as powerful as hunting a large animal. None of them creates a dramatic image of survival. But a child's life is often protected by small acts repeated many times. One warning, one handful of food, one moment of being watched. One older person who had time to notice what a busy mother could not see. This is where old age begins to look different. A woman past her strongest reproductive years might still be part of the reproductive success of the group, not by having another child herself, but by helping existing children live long enough to become adults. In human evolution, this possibility matters because human children are costly. They need food for years. They need teaching for years. They need adults who can tolerate their slowness, mistakes, curiosity, and dependence. A group with no extra caregivers would place more pressure on mothers and fathers. A group with older helpers might spread that pressure across more people. We should not imagine this as a perfect family picture. Prehistoric kinship was probably varied. Some children may have had grandmothers nearby. Others may not. Some older women may have been strong foragers. Others may have been frail. Some groups may have depended more on fathers, siblings, aunts, uncles, or unrelated helpers. But the larger human pattern is clear enough to consider carefully. Children did not grow through food alone. They grew through attention, and attention is easier to give when care is shared. An older woman who stayed near camp, moved more slowly, or no longer spent all her energy on bearing infants, could still watch, sort, prepare, guide, and remember. Her value may have been measured not in one great event, but in the reduced danger around children. Fewer accidents, less hunger, more learning, more chances for a mother to recover and gather, more time for the next generation to become strong. This does not answer everything about why old people mattered in prehistoric life, because old men, older siblings, and other elders also had roles to consider. But grandmothers reveal something important. The value of an old person did not have to be separate from survival. Care itself could be survival. A child kept alive today could become a skilled adult tomorrow. A mother helped today could continue supporting the group. A memory shared today could become caution in a child's mind years later. In that quiet chain, the old were not outside the future. They were one of the ways the future was protected. The work that helped children survive was not always the work that looked important from far away. In prehistoric life, many of the most protective acts may have happened close to the ground, close to the fire, and close to the ordinary movements of a camp. An older person did not need to be the fastest walker in order to matter there. They did not need to leave for the longest hunt, carry the heaviest load, or take the greatest risk. They could matter by staying near the places where small dangers gathered. A child near a fire is not in a dramatic scene, but the danger is real. A child reaching for food before it is ready is not making a large mistake, but the mistake can harm them. A toddler wandering a few steps too far from the group may not look like a crisis at first, but distance can grow quickly when adults are busy. These are the kinds of moments where an older person's attention could become valuable. The value was not loud. It may have been as simple as a hand reaching out before a child touched embers, a voice calling a child back before they crossed into brush, or an older pair of eyes noticing that the smoke was blowing toward a sleeping baby. In a prehistoric group, no one had endless attention. A mother could not watch every child every moment. A father could not be everywhere at once. Strong adults often had work that pulled their eyes outward toward food, movement, animals, weather, tools, or shelter. Older people, depending on their health and role in the group, may have helped hold attention inward toward the vulnerable center of daily life. Preparing food was another quiet form of protection. Many foods in human history have required knowledge before they could be eaten safely or usefully. Some needed peeling, pounding, roasting, soaking, cracking, sorting, or careful choice. We should not pretend to know the exact menu of every prehistoric group because foods changed by region and season. But it is safe to say that eating was not always as simple as picking something up and putting it in the mouth. Children especially needed help. Their teeth, stomachs, patience, and judgment were still developing. An older person could help turn raw possibility into safer nourishment. They might break food into smaller pieces, soften it near the fire, sort out what should not be eaten, or show a child how to wait. These small actions could reduce waste and reduce harm. A hungry child wants quickly. An experienced adult or elder may know that quickly is not always safely. Fire, too, was not only warmth. It was a center of work, danger, memory, and care. Someone had to know how close was too close, how smoke moved, when fuel was low, which pieces might burn too fast, and how to keep young children from treating fire as play. An older person near the fire could serve as a living boundary between comfort and harm. They might not have made fire every time. They might not have controlled the whole camp, but their presence could help keep the fire useful instead of dangerous. This is important because prehistoric life was filled with small thresholds, a little too close to flame, a little too far from the group, a little too much of the wrong food, a little too long in the cold, a little too careless near water, stone, bone, sharp edges, or animal remains. Modern people often notice survival only when it looks extreme, but much of survival is the prevention of small errors. Older people may have mattered because they could notice these thresholds. Their bodies may have slowed, but their attention may have sharpened around familiar risks. They had seen children make the same mistakes before. They had seen food wasted, fires mishandled, tools touched wrongly, and tired adults overlook what rested beside them. This does not mean older people were always gentle guardians. Some may have been too weak to do much. Some may have been impatient. Some groups may have relied more on other adults or older children, but when elders were present and engaged, they could make the daily environment safer in ways that did not leave great evidence behind. No carved stone records the child who did not fall. No bone announces the burn that never happened. No ancient hearth tells us which older person kept a toddler from crawling into smoke, yet these absences may be part of the answer. Old people mattered not only through what they added, but through what they quietly prevented. In prehistoric life, care was often practical before it was symbolic. A watched child, a safer meal, a steadier fire, a warning given at the right moment, these were not small things. They were the slow work by which a group kept its future alive. The value of old people in prehistoric life was probably not held inside one single task. It was not only that an older woman watched a child, or that an older man remembered a path, or that an elder warned someone away from bad food. Those things mattered, but they mattered most because they belonged to a larger system of care. A human group survived through many overlapping forms of help. One person carried wood, another prepared food, another watched the children, another repaired a tool, another remembered the safest place to sleep, another noticed that someone was sick, tired, cold, or too quiet. In such a group, survival did not come from one heroic act, repeated again and again. It came from many small acts woven together until the group became more stable than any one person alone. Old people may have mattered because they added another layer to that woven care. They could help where speed was not the main requirement. They could sit near children while others worked. They could sort, prepare, advise, warn, remember, repeat, and notice. These actions may seem small because they do not make a dramatic picture, but in prehistoric life, small forms of support could shift the pressure on everyone else. If an older person watched a child, a mother might gather more safely or rest a little longer. If an older person prepared food, a tired adult might save energy. If an elder kept a child away from fire, a dangerous injury might never happen. If someone older recognized a sign of illness or cold, the group might respond earlier. None of this required the older person to be the strongest body in the camp. It required them to be part of a shared network where different ages carried different kinds of usefulness. This is important because human beings are deeply dependent when young. A baby cannot survive alone. A child takes years to learn enough to become fully capable. A mother or father can give enormous care, but no single caregiver has endless strength. The more a group could spread care across many people, the less fragile that care became. Older people may have helped spread that burden. They may have made it possible for children to be watched by more eyes, fed by more hands, corrected by more voices, and protected by more memories. This does not mean every old person was always cared for or always useful. Prehistoric life was too long and varied for such a simple claim. Some elders may have had strong roles. Others may have been weak, ill, dependent, or overlooked. Some groups may have had few older adults at all because life was harsh and many died younger. But when older people were present and when they were able to contribute, their value may have appeared inside the group structure rather than inside one obvious event. A modern viewer might ask, what did that old person do? The better question may be, what became easier because that old person was there? Did a child stay safer? Did a mother carry less stress? Did a young adult learn a skill sooner? Did the group remember a danger before repeating a mistake? Did care become less concentrated on one exhausted person? These are difficult things to measure, even today. In deep prehistory, they are almost impossible to see directly, but they fit with a larger truth about human survival. People did not endure because every member performed the same role. They endured because different bodies, ages, skills, and memories could support one another. The young brought energy, skilled adults brought strength and production. Children brought the future, but also need. Older people could bring memory, attention, and help that made the whole system less brittle. Care itself was not separate from survival. It was one of the ways survival happened. An older person near the fire, watching, sorting, warning, remembering, and guiding, may not have looked like the center of the group, but they may have helped keep the center from breaking. And perhaps that is why old people mattered, not because they always saved the group in one great moment, but because they helped the group remain a group through many ordinary days. Not every form of survival in prehistoric life looked like movement. This is easy to forget because the strongest images of the ancient world are often images of pursuit, people following animals, crossing open land, carrying tools, escaping weather, searching for food before the day ends. Those images are not wrong. Movement mattered. Strength mattered. A young body could do things an older body might struggle to do. But if we imagine prehistoric survival only as running, hunting, lifting, and traveling, we miss much of the daily work that kept a group alive. Many important tasks happened slowly. They happened with hands, eyes, patience, and memory. They happened near the fire, beside a shelter, at the edge of a stream, under shade, or during the quiet hours when the group was not moving. These slower tasks could be just as necessary as the dramatic ones. A stone edge had to be shaped carefully, fibers had to be twisted or tied, wood had to be chosen, not only gathered. Food had to be sorted, cracked, roasted, softened, or shared. Skins, baskets, carrying materials, simple shelters, bedding, and tools all required attention. Even a small mistake could matter. A tool made poorly might break at the wrong time. Food prepared carelessly might be wasted or unsafe. A shelter placed badly might let in cold wind. A fire fed with the wrong material might smoke heavily or die too quickly. These are not the kinds of moments that usually become stories, but they are part of the real texture of prehistoric life. This is where old people may have held value that was not based on speed. An older person with slower legs could still have experienced hands. Their fingers might remember pressure. Their eyes might notice a flaw in stone, wood, bone, hide, or plant fiber. Their body might know how to use less effort because it had done the same task many times before. In a world where tools were not bought, replaced, or repaired with modern supplies, knowing how to make something last mattered. Skill was a form of saved energy. A younger person might strike harder. An older person might know where to strike. A younger person might work quickly. An older person might see that quickness was about to ruin the material. This does not mean old hands were always better hands. Age can bring stiffness, pain, poor eyesight, or reduced strength. Some tasks would have become harder with time, but many kinds of knowledge do not disappear the moment the body slows down. A person who could no longer travel far might still help prepare what others needed before they left. A person who no longer hunted might still repair a cord, sharpen a tool, sort dry fuel, prepare food for children, or teach a younger hand how not to waste material. In prehistoric life, such work could support the visible work of stronger adults. The hunt did not begin only when people started walking. It began earlier, in the making of tools, the choosing of materials, the sharing of knowledge, and the care that allowed others to leave camp with enough strength. Gathering did not begin only when someone picked food from the land. It began with knowing what was worth gathering, what needed preparation, and what should be avoided. Even rest was not empty. Rest allowed bodies to recover, children to be watched, tools to be checked, and plans to be shaped. Old people may have mattered because they could contribute inside these slower spaces. Their usefulness did not always stand in front of the group like a heavy load carried across a river. It could sit quietly inside the way daily life was organized. The older person might not bring back the largest amount of food, but they might help make food safer. They might not walk at the front of the group, but they might notice what should be prepared before the next movement. They might not be the strongest maker of tools, but they might preserve a method that younger people were still learning. This is one of the reasons the question of old age in prehistoric life cannot be answered by asking only who could run, lift, or hunt. Human survival depended on a chain of tasks, and not every link in that chain required youth. Some links required steadiness, some required repetition, some required the memory of mistakes made long ago. When old people mattered, they may have mattered through these slow skills, not the power to move faster through the world, but the ability to help the group move through the world with fewer wasted steps. Slow skills are easy to overlook because they do not announce themselves. A person shaping a stone edge, sorting food beside a fire, checking the dryness of wood, or showing a child how to handle a sharp tool does not look like the center of survival. Yet in prehistoric life, these quiet tasks helped make the larger tasks possible. A group could not depend only on the moment of finding food. It also had to depend on the many small preparations that came before and after. Tools had to be made, repaired, carried, and understood. Food had to be recognized, cleaned, divided, softened, roasted, cracked, or saved for the right moment. Materials had to be chosen carefully, because not every stone, branch, bone, hide, fiber, or shell could do the same work. In this world, an older person might matter not because they could do the heaviest task, but because they could notice the difference between good material and poor material before effort was wasted. A young person might pick up any stone that looked sharp. An older maker might know that the stone would split badly, or that another piece nearby would hold an edge longer. A young person might gather wood quickly. An older person might know which wood would smoke, which would burn hot, which would last through the night, and which would fail when damp. These are not spectacular forms of knowledge, but they belong directly to the question of why old people mattered in prehistoric life. They show that survival was not only a contest of strength, it was also a contest against waste, error, cold, hunger, and repeated small failures. Classification was one of these quiet skills. To classify is simply to know that one thing is not the same as another, even when they look similar. One route may be useful, another useless, another unsafe. One track may be fresh, another too old to follow. One piece of bone may be good for shaping, another too brittle. One patch of ground may look dry on top but hold dampness underneath. Such knowledge takes time. It grows from touching, smelling, watching, comparing, failing, and remembering. Older people, if they had spent many years in the same or similar environments, could carry these categories inside them. They might not name them in modern ways, they might not explain them as science, but they could still know, through practice, that this should be kept, that should be thrown away, this should be cooked longer, that should not be given to a child, this path is old, that mark is fresh. Processing food was another area where slow knowledge mattered. Many foods become more useful when handled correctly. Some become softer after heat. Some need breaking open. Some need patience. Some are not worth the effort unless hunger is severe. An older person could help judge these things. Their contribution may have been quiet, but it could affect how much nourishment the group actually received from what it found. Finding food is one step. Turning it into something safe and useful is another. Around the camp, old people may also have helped keep rhythm. A group needed rhythm because daily life could not be chaos. Children had to be watched while tools were made. Fire had to be tended while food was prepared. People returning tired needed a place where some things were already understood. If every task had to be rediscovered each day, the group would lose strength. Older people could help preserve habits, where to place sharp tools, how to store certain materials, when to prepare before darkness, how to divide attention between children, fire, food, and weather. These habits may sound ordinary, but ordinary habits protect life. They reduce confusion. They allow younger adults to spend strength where strength is most needed. We cannot know every task performed by every elder in deep prehistory, and we should not pretend that we can. But the logic of human life suggests that older adults could matter through accumulated practical skill. Their value could be held in hands that remembered, eyes that compared, and voices that corrected small mistakes before they became larger ones. In this way, the old helped keep the daily machinery of survival moving, not like leaders standing above the group, but like steady parts of the group's living memory. A small skill can disappear more easily than a large object. A stugger de pool, if it is left behind, may remain in the ground for thousands of years. A bone point may survive. A shell, a hearth, or a mark in stone may last long enough for someone in the far future to find it. But the knowledge of how to choose the right stone, how to hold it, how hard to strike it, how to repair a broken edge, how to know when food is ready, or how to avoid wasting a useful material cannot survive by itself. It has to pass from one living person to another. This is why the small skills of old people may have mattered so much in prehistoric life. Their value was not always in owning knowledge, but in keeping knowledge from breaking. A group could lose a tool and make another one if someone remembered how. But if no one remembered the method, the loss was deeper. In a world without writing, every useful skill depended on repetition, observation, and memory. A young person had to see the movement many times before it became natural. They had to make mistakes while someone still knew how to correct them. They had to learn which details mattered and which details did not. Older people, when they still had the ability to teach, could slow a task down and protect it from being lost. They might show how a fiber should be twisted so it did not loosen. They might show how a hide should be scraped without tearing. They might show how a tool edge should be refreshed instead of thrown away. They might show how to prepare a hard food so that a child or an older mouth could eat it. These were not always separate inventions. They were inherited habits, refined by many hands over time. If the old did not pass them on, the young might have to rediscover them through trial, waste, and danger. This matters because prehistoric survival was full of knowledge that was too ordinary to look important. A young person could easily remember the big lesson, that fire is useful, that sharp stone cuts, that some plants can feed the group, that animals leave tracks. But the smaller lesson often made the difference. How close should food be placed to heat? Which part of the plant is useful? When is a track worth following? How dry must wood be? How much pressure will break the edge? How long can a child be left near water before risk grows? These answers were not fixed everywhere. They changed with place, season, material, and group habit. The old may have mattered because they carried the local version of these answers. They held the small adjustments that made knowledge fit one landscape rather than another. We should be careful not to imagine that every older person was a master of every skill. Knowledge in prehistoric groups was likely spread across many people. Some adults may have been better at tools, others may have known plants, others may have understood animal movement, shelter, weather, fire, or children. But older adults had one possible advantage. They had more time for small differences to accumulate. They may have seen a method fail and then improve. They may have remembered why the group stopped doing something a certain way. They may have known that an old habit, strange to the young, existed because someone had once paid for the mistake. This is one of the quietest forms of inheritance, not stories of greatness, but corrections. Not grand wisdom, but practical limits. Do not strike there. Do not eat it yet. Do not sleep on that damp ground. Do not waste that piece. Save this for later. Hold it like this. Wait, try again. Such phrases may sound simple, but they are how a group keeps skill alive. In prehistoric life, old people may have mattered because they made the past usable. They allowed the young to begin not from emptiness, but from accumulated practice. And when a group could carry its small skills forward, it carried more than tools. It carried a way of surviving that had already been tested by time. A prehistoric group did not survive only by finding food, making tools, and choosing shelter. It also had to remain a group. This may sound simple, but it is one of the hardest parts of human life. Hunger does not only weaken the body, it changes the mood of people. Cold does not only make hands stiff, it makes patience thinner. Fear does not only sharpen the senses, it can also make people suspicious, hurried, angry, or silent. In a small group, emotions were not private in the way modern people sometimes imagine them to be. One person's panic could spread. One person's anger could disturb a fragile moment. A conflict between adults could change how children felt, how food was shared, how decisions were made, and how safely the group moved. Prehistoric life required cooperation, but cooperation is not automatic. It has to be held together, especially when everyone is tired. This is where old people may have mattered in another quiet way. They may have helped the group remember that fear was not the same as the end. An older person who had seen many difficult seasons might not become calm because life was easy. They might become calm because the shape of hardship was familiar. They had seen hunger arrive before. They had seen storms pass. They had seen injuries heal or fail to heal. They had seen children cry through cold nights and later run again in warmer weather. They had seen arguments rise and settle. This did not make them peaceful all the time. Old people could be afraid, impatient, angry, or difficult too. Age does not remove human emotion, but age can change the way emotion is carried. A young adult facing their first terrible winter might feel that the world had broken open. An older person might feel the same danger, but also remember that a bad season can have stages, that not every frightening sign becomes disaster, and that panic often spends energy the group cannot spare. In this sense, emotional steadiness could be a survival skill. It did not fill the stomach directly, but it could prevent the group from making hunger worse through poor decisions. A frightened group may move too soon, an angry group may split at the wrong moment. A desperate group may ignore children, waste food, take dangerous risks, or fail to listen. A calmer group still suffers, but it may think more clearly. Older people could sometimes help create that calmer space, not by giving speeches and not by controlling everyone, but through presence, tone, habit, and memory. A slower voice near the fire might make others pause. A person who had survived loss might remind the group, without saying much, that grief could be endured. Someone who had seen conflict before might know when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to separate two people, or when to turn attention back toward a practical task. These are delicate things, and we cannot prove them for every prehistoric group. But the logic of small human communities makes them worth considering. Groups that live closely together must manage feeling as well as food. They must keep children from being swallowed by adult fear. They must keep tired people from turning on one another. They must keep decisions from becoming reactions. The old may have mattered because they carried a longer emotional memory. They knew, perhaps through scars and losses, that the group had been frightened before and had still continued. That kind of knowledge is not the same as a route to water or a way to prepare food. It is more inward. It tells the group that this moment, however hard, is still part of a longer life. In prehistoric life, that could matter deeply. A group that could stay together through strain had a better chance to use its knowledge, protect its children, and make careful choices. A group that broke apart emotionally might lose more than comfort. It might lose coordination, trust, and the shared attention that survival required. So when we ask why old people mattered, we should not look only at their hands or legs. We should also look at what their presence may have done to the emotional weather of the group. Sometimes the oldest person near the fire may have helped others feel that the night was frightening, but not unknowable, hard, but not without memory, dangerous, but not yet the end. A person who has lived through loss carries a different kind of knowledge. It is not the same as knowing where water remains in a dry season, or which wood burns longer, or how to shape a stone edge. It is a knowledge of endurance. In prehistoric life, loss was not rare. Children could die, adults could be injured, food could fail, a familiar place could become empty, a group could lose someone important and still have to move, eat, protect the young, keep the fire alive, and face the next morning. Grief did not pause survival. This is difficult to imagine from a comfortable distance, but it may have been one of the emotional facts of ancient life. People had to feel pain and continue acting. They had to carry memory and hunger at the same time. In such a world, older people may have mattered because they had already experienced the terrible truth that life can break and still go on. A young person meeting deep loss for the first time might feel that nothing could continue afterward. The world might seem emptied of meaning, the group's rhythm might feel ruined, but an older person may have seen grief before. They may have known that the first days after a death feel different from the days that come later. They may have known that silence changes, that children begin to play again, that hunger returns, that fire still needs tending, and that the body slowly learns to move while carrying sorrow. This kind of knowledge is not cheerful. It does not erase suffering. It does not make loss acceptable or easy, but it can help a group avoid being destroyed by the shock of feeling alone inside pain. An elder who had buried, lost, or watched others disappear may not have had comforting words in the modern sense. They may not have spoken much at all. Their value may have been in their presence. They were proof that a human being could pass through fear, hunger, injury, or grief and still remain part of the living. In a small prehistoric group, that proof could matter. When younger adults were shaken, when children watched the faces of the grown people around them, when a difficult season seemed endless, an old person's steadiness could help hold the emotional shape of the group, not because the old person felt nothing, but because they had felt much before. This matters directly to the question of why old people mattered in prehistoric life. They may have helped the group remember that hardship had a past, and if it had a past, then perhaps it also had a future. A bad winter was not just cold, it was a test of whether people could keep trusting one another while cold changed their moods. A failed hunt was not just hunger, it was a test of whether frustration would turn into blame. A death was not just absence, it was a test of whether the group could continue caring for the living while honoring the one who was gone. Older people may have helped with these transitions. They could remind the group, through habit and memory, how to return to ordinary tasks after shock, gather fuel, watch the children, share the food, repair the shelter, move when it is time, wait when waiting is safer. These actions do not remove grief, but they give grief a place inside life instead of letting it break the group apart. We should not make the old into perfect emotional guardians. Some elders may have been overwhelmed by loss. Some may have become bitter, fearful, or withdrawn. Some younger people may have shown more courage than the old. Human beings have always varied, but age gives a person more chances to experience return. The return of warmth after cold, the return of food after hunger, the return of laughter after silence, the return of movement after mourning. In prehistoric life, that repeated return may have been a quiet form of teaching. It told the group that the present pain was real, but not the whole story. The old mattered because they could carry the memory of continuation. They could help others feel, without pretending, that terrible days had come before and that the group had once found a way to keep breathing through them. Calm is not usually the first thing we imagine when we think about survival. We imagine speed, strength, sharp tools, fire, shelter, food, and the ability to move away from danger. These things mattered in prehistoric life, and none of them should be dismissed. But calm also has a place in survival, because a frightened mind does not always choose well. When people are hungry, cold, tired, or grieving, the body begins to push for quick answers. Move now, blame someone, take the risk, eat whatever is close, leave before morning, stay even when staying is dangerous. Fear can protect, but fear can also narrow the world until only the nearest reaction seems possible. A small prehistoric group could not afford too many reactions that wasted strength. It needed attention. It needed timing. It needed people who could pause long enough to notice whether danger was real, whether a risk was worth taking, and whether the group was still thinking together. Older people may have mattered because they could sometimes help create that pause. Not because they were never afraid, and not because age made them automatically wise, but because they had lived long enough to know that panic has a cost. They may have seen people run too soon, fight too quickly, waste food too carelessly, or ignore signs because fear was louder than memory. Be more prudes. They may have learned, slowly and painfully, that surviving a hard moment often depends on not letting the hard moment become the only thing the group can see. This kind of calm is difficult to measure. If a strong adult carries a child across a river, everyone can see the strength. If a skilled hunter brings back food, everyone can see the result. But if an older person helps keep a group from splitting during hunger, if they soften an argument before it becomes dangerous, if they remind frightened people to wait until morning, or if their steady presence keeps children from absorbing too much adult panic, the result may look like nothing happened. And that may be the point. Some of the most important forms of survival leave no dramatic trace because they prevent the dramatic event from occurring. No broken group, no careless journey into darkness, no fight that ruins trust, no child frightened into silence for too long, no desperate choice made before the group has thought clearly. In this sense, calm can be a hidden tool. It does not cut like stone. It does not burn like fire. It does not feed the body directly, but it protects the space in which better decisions can be made. A group that can remain calm enough to listen can use its memory. A group that can remain calm enough to share can protect its children. A group that can remain calm enough to wait can avoid spending strength at the wrong time. Older people, especially those who had endured earlier seasons of fear, may have helped hold that space. Their value may have appeared in their tone, their silence, their timing, their refusal to rush, or their ability to return attention to the next small task. Gather the wood, keep the fire alive. Feed the child, watch the sky. Do not decide everything while afraid. These are not grand words, but they carry a deep human truth. Survival is not only what a group does with its hands, it is also what a group does with its fear. We should be careful not to say that every elder was calm or that every young person was reckless. That would be false and too simple. Some young adults may have been remarkably steady. Some elders may have been anxious, angry, or difficult. But in the larger pattern of human life, age can give people more chances to learn the rhythm of trouble. The first fear feels endless. The 10th fear may still hurt, but it may also be recognized. Recognition can soften panic just enough for thought to return. That small space between fear and action may have mattered greatly in prehistoric life. Perhaps old people mattered because they helped the group keep that space open. They reminded others, not always through speech, that the night was frightening but not meaningless, that hunger was dangerous but not new, that grief was heavy but not the end of movement. Their calm was not weakness, it was survival in a quieter form. The care of weak people is one of the most difficult things to explain if we imagine prehistoric life as nothing but a hard contest of usefulness. A person who was injured, sick, very young, very old, or unable to move easily could create real pressure for a small group. They might need food without bringing much back. They might slow travel. They might need warmth, protection, help with movement, or softer food. From a narrow view of survival, this seems inefficient. But human life may have become human partly because it did not remain trapped inside that narrow view. At different points in the deep past, we find signs that some people survived injuries or conditions that would have made life difficult without help. These signs do not allow us to tell a complete story. A healed bone does not speak. A damaged skeleton does not tell us who gave food, who waited, who carried, who protected, or how the group felt. But healed injuries can suggest that a person lived long enough for the body to repair itself, and in some cases, that survival would have been difficult without support from others. This matters because care is not an extra decoration placed on top of survival. Care can be one of the ways survival is organized. If someone breaks a bone, loses strength, becomes ill, or grows too old to move quickly, the group faces a decision. Not always a dramatic spoken decision, but a practical one repeated through many days. Will someone share food? Will someone slow down? Will someone make space near the fire? Will someone help the weakened person keep living inside the group? In prehistoric life, such care would have had costs. A group could not care for everyone endlessly in every condition. Hunger, climate, danger, and movement may have forced painful limits. We should never pretend that the ancient world was simple kindness, but we should also not assume it was simple cruelty. The evidence we do have invites a more complicated picture. Human beings and close human relatives, such as Neanderthals, appear to have lived in social worlds where injured or impaired individuals could sometimes survive long enough to leave traces of healing. That survival suggests a social capacity deeper than raw strength. It suggests that at least some groups could adjust around vulnerability. This has a direct connection to old people. Old age is not the same as injury, but it often brings vulnerability into daily life. Slower movement, worn teeth, weaker joints, poorer sight, or reduced stamina could make an older person depend on others in certain ways. If a group already had habits of helping the young, the sick, the injured, and the temporarily weak, then caring for the old may not have been a separate moral invention. It may have belonged to the same social pattern, the recognition that every person passes through dependence. A child begins life completely dependent. A strong adult may become dependent after injury. A mother may need support after birth. An older person may need help in the cold or on a difficult path. In a human group, dependence moves from body to body across time. No one stays at peak strength forever. This is one reason care may have become woven into human survival. A group that only valued people at the moment of maximum strength would constantly lose knowledge, relationships, children, injured adults, and elders. A group that could support vulnerability, at least sometimes, could preserve more of itself. This does not mean that all prehistoric care was gentle, equal, or based on modern ideas of compassion. It may have been practical, emotional, kin-based, reciprocal, habitual, or all of these at once. Someone might be cared for because they were loved. Someone might be cared for because they had once helped others. Someone might be cared for because they still held knowledge. Someone might be cared for because leaving them behind would damage the trust of the group. The point is not to decide one motive too quickly. The point is to see that caring for the weak could be part of how human groups stayed together. When old people mattered, they mattered inside this wider human pattern. Their presence reminded the group that strength was temporary, that dependence was not an exception, and that survival sometimes meant keeping people close, even when their bodies no longer carried the heaviest load. Care, in prehistoric life, should not be imagined only as kindness in the modern sense. It may have included tenderness, love, loyalty, and grief, because prehistoric people were still human beings with bonds, attachments, and emotions. But care may also have been practical. It may have been part of how a small group protected itself from becoming too fragile. When someone was weak, the group did not face only the needs of that one person. It faced the meaning of weakness inside the group as a whole. If a child saw an injured adult abandoned too quickly, what did that teach the child about trust? If a mother knew that sickness would leave her alone, how safe could she feel inside the group? If a strong adult saw that old age meant instant rejection, what did that do to cooperation before old age arrived? These questions cannot be answered directly from bones or tools, but they help us understand why care may have had survival value beyond the individual receiving it. A group that sometimes cared for the weak was not necessarily being soft. It may have been protecting the bonds that allowed people to share food, teach children, take risks for one another, and remain together through hard seasons. Trust is not separate from survival. In a small prehistoric group, trust could affect who shared meat, who watched a child, who warned others of danger, who helped carry materials, who stayed awake, who followed advice, and who returned after going out from camp. If people believed that their value ended the moment their body weakened, cooperation would carry a quieter fear. Everyone would know that injury, illness, childbirth, childhood, and old age could push them outside the circle. But if the group had a habit of care, even an imperfect one, then the circle of belonging became stronger. A person could give effort today with some sense that they would not be instantly worthless tomorrow. This does not mean prehistoric groups had modern moral systems or clear rules about human dignity. We should not place our own language too easily into their world. Their care may have been shaped by kinship, memory, usefulness, affection, habit, fear, obligation, or the simple fact that people who live closely together become part of one another's survival. But even practical care can become deeply human. A person who helps an elder eat softer food may be acting from affection, from duty, from memory of what that elder once gave, or from the understanding that children are watching. A person who waits for an older body during travel may be protecting knowledge, preserving trust, or simply refusing to break a bond too easily. These motives can overlap. Human care rarely comes from one pure reason. In prehistoric life, old people may have mattered because caring for them taught the group how to remain human under pressure. The old person was not only someone receiving help, they were also a reminder that every strong body is temporary. The hunter may one day limp. The gatherer may one day lose sight. The mother may one day become the grandmother. The child being watched near the fire may one day become the person watching another child. Care moves through time. It is given, received, remembered, and returned in different forms. A group that understood this did not need to say it in modern words. It could live it through repeated actions, sharing food, making space, slowing down, listening, waiting, and keeping someone near the fire when their body had become less forceful. This kind of care may have helped stabilize the social world around children and adults alike. It told the young that people did not matter only when they were fast. It told the injured that weakness did not always mean isolation. It told the old that their slower bodies still belonged to the group's story. Again, this picture must remain careful. There were surely limits, hard choices, and moments when care failed. But the existence of care at all changes the question. Old people mattered not only because of what they could do, but because the act of caring for them may have strengthened the group's own idea of belonging. A group that cared for the weak was not only protecting one fragile person, it was also protecting the shape of the group itself. This is an important part of why old people may have mattered in prehistoric life. When an older person slowed down, needed softer food, took longer to rise, or could no longer travel as easily, the group faced a quiet test. Would the group remain connected when one member became less physically useful? Would it still share attention when the return was not immediate? Would children see that belonging survived weakness, or would they learn that a person's place ended the moment strength faded? These questions may sound modern, but the problem behind them is ancient. Human groups depend on trust. Trust is not only a feeling, it is a working part of survival. It helps people share food, watch one another's children, accept warnings, divide labor, and remain calm enough to make decisions together. If trust breaks, the group may still have strong individuals, but it becomes less able to act as one body. An old person near the fire, needing help but still belonging, may have helped teach the group that dependence did not automatically mean exclusion. That lesson could matter to everyone, because every person in the group had either been dependent before, was dependent now, or might become dependent later. A child was dependent from the beginning. A young adult could become dependent through injury. A mother might need help after birth. A skilled hunter could fall ill. A gatherer could grow weak during hunger. An older person simply made visible a truth that belonged to all human bodies. Strength changes. If a group could live with that truth, it could become more stable. Caring for the old may have helped the group practice the habits that kept people from becoming isolated at the first sign of weakness. Share a little food, make room near warmth, wait a little longer, listen to a slower voice. Let the young see care being given. These actions were not only about kindness, they were about maintaining the social fabric that allowed the group to keep functioning when life became difficult. In prehistoric life, a group that could not care at all would be brittle. It might look efficient for a short time because no energy was spent on the weak, but brittleness has a hidden cost. The moment a strong person became injured, the moment a child needed more attention, the moment hunger weakened several bodies at once, the group would have fewer habits of support to fall back on. Care had to be learned before the crisis. It had to be repeated in ordinary days so that it could hold during extraordinary ones. Older people may have been part of that learning. Their presence asked the group, again and again, to make space for a slower kind of life. Sometimes that space may have preserved knowledge. Sometimes it may have protected children. Sometimes it may have softened fear. Sometimes it may simply have reminded everyone that a human being was not only valuable at the peak of strength. We should remain careful. Not every prehistoric group would have cared in the same way. Not every elder would have been protected. Hard hunger, danger, migration, or conflict could force painful choices we cannot fully reconstruct. But if we ask why old people mattered in prehistoric life, one answer may be that they helped reveal what kind of group humans were becoming. A group that kept an elder close was not only feeding a slower body, it was preserving memory, trust, and the habit of shared responsibility. It was teaching children that life has stages, and that each stage still belongs to the group. It was showing adults that their own future weakness would not necessarily erase their place. In that sense, caring for old people may have helped human groups keep from falling apart. The old were not outside survival, they were part of the social glue that made survival possible. A successful hunt could keep a group alive for a day or for several days, depending on the animal, the season, and the number of mouths waiting near the fire. It could bring strength back into tired bodies. It could quiet hunger, warm the mood of the camp, and give children the feeling that the world was generous again. In prehistoric life, such moments mattered deeply. Food was not an idea, it was survival made visible. A group that found meat, gathered enough plants, collected shellfish, dug roots, or discovered a reliable source of nourishment had won something real against uncertainty. But one good day, by itself, did not solve the larger problem of being human in a changing world. The animal eaten today would not walk back tomorrow. The fruit gathered now would not remain ripe forever. The stream that gave water this season might shrink in another. A hunting success could answer hunger in the present, but memory helped the group ask a longer question. How do we survive when this success is gone? This is where older people may have mattered in a way that was easy to miss. A young hunter returning with food could be celebrated immediately. Everyone could see the result. But an older person, carrying memories of many seasons, might help the group survive through time, not just through one event. They might remember that after animals were plentiful in one valley, they often shifted toward another place when the weather changed. They might remember that a good season could be followed by scarcity, and that food should not be treated as if the present would last forever. They might remember that a certain kind of abundance was temporary, that a place once trusted had failed before, or that hunger often began quietly before anyone wanted to admit it. In this sense, memory could be more important than a single success because memory helps success become part of planning. Without memory, each good day might make the group careless. With memory, a good day could become a chance to prepare for the next hard one. This does not mean older people were always cautious or always right. Some may have misjudged the world. Some younger adults may have seen new opportunities more clearly. A group needed energy and imagination as much as memory. But age offered the possibility of comparison. A successful hunt today could be compared with earlier hunts, earlier seasons, earlier mistakes, earlier times when people ate too quickly, moved too late, or trusted a place too long. That comparison may have shaped the rhythm of survival. It could influence how food was shared, when the group moved, who rested, who searched, who watched children, and how much risk seemed wise. A single season of success can make people feel strong. A long memory can remind them that strength must be carried carefully. This is why old people may have mattered, even when they did not bring back the most visible prize. They helped the group see beyond the immediate relief of having survived today. They carried the uncomfortable knowledge that today's safety was not a permanent condition. In prehistoric life, that knowledge may have been precious. A group that only reacted to hunger when hunger was already severe was always late. A group that remembered earlier patterns had a chance, however small, to act before the danger fully arrived. The old person's memory did not replace food. It did not fill a child's stomach or warm a cold hand by itself. But it could influence the choices that made food more likely, hunger less sudden, and danger less surprising. A hunt could feed the body. Memory could guide the group toward the next hunt, the next shelter, the next season, and the next decision. That is why the value of old people cannot be measured only by what they produced in one day. Some forms of survival are immediate, others stretch across years, and the oldest people, when they were listened to, may have helped the group live inside that longer stretch of time. Memory does not only move backward, it also moves forward. This may be one of the most important things older people gave to prehistoric life. When an elder remembered a dry season, a dangerous path, a useful plant, a failed camp, or a time when the group almost waited too long, that memory belonged first to the past. But once it was spoken, shown, corrected, repeated, or acted out in front of younger people, it began to belong to the future. A child who heard the warning could carry it into adulthood. A young hunter who listened to the old comparison could use it many seasons later. A mother who remembered how her grandmother prepared food could pass the method to another child beside another fire. In this way, old people may have connected generations, not through grand speeches, but through practical continuity. They made it harder for the group to begin again from nothing. This matters because a human group is not only alive in the bodies that breathe today, it is also alive in the habits those bodies have inherited. The way people choose a camp, divide food, quiet a frightened child, prepare a route, repair a tool, wait before moving, or read a shift in weather may carry traces of people who are no longer there. An older person stands close to that invisible line. They may have known people the children never met. They may have learned from adults who had died years before. They may have remembered a voice, a gesture, a warning, or a way of doing something that had already passed through several hands before reaching them. When they taught or corrected the young, they were not only giving their own experience, they were passing along pieces of other lives. This is how a group becomes more than a collection of separate individuals. It becomes a chain of attention. Each generation receives a world already partly interpreted by those who came before. A child does not see only fire. They see fire through the rules others have taught them. They do not see only a river. They see a place where someone once warned them about slippery stones, animal tracks, cold water, or bad crossing. They do not see only an old tool. They see a method held in the hands of someone older. This does not require written language. It does not even require formal teaching. It requires repeated nearness. It requires older people, skilled adults, parents, siblings, and other caregivers living close enough for knowledge to pass through ordinary life. Old people may have mattered because they helped lengthen that chain. They had lived long enough to receive more from the generation before and to give more to the generation after. The young were the future of the group, but the old helped make sure that future was not empty. Of course, memory changes when it passes from person to person. A warning can become simplified. A story can become larger. A method can be altered. Some knowledge can be lost. Some new knowledge can be added by the young. Human culture is not a fixed object handed down unchanged. It is more like a fire that must be kept alive, fed, moved, and sometimes remade. Older people were not the only keepers of that fire, but they could be important keepers because they had seen more of its earlier forms. They knew, perhaps, why a rule existed even after younger people had forgotten the danger behind it. They knew that a certain habit was not meaningless caution, but the memory of an old mistake. This is why the loss of an older person could mean more than the loss of one body. It could mean the loss of a bridge. If no one else remembered a place, a season, a method, a relationship, or a warning, then that piece of the group's past might disappear with them. And once unwritten knowledge disappears, it can be hard to recover. The group may still survive. The young may invent, adapt, and learn again, but they may have to pay the cost of rediscovery. In prehistoric life, where mistakes could be expensive, the bridge between generations was not decorative. It was practical. Old people mattered because they helped the living speak with the dead without knowing they were doing it. Through them, the experiences of earlier people could still guide children who had never met them. Through them, the group's memory could step across time. When an old person died in prehistoric life, the group did not lose only a body. It may also have lost a set of memories that could not be stored anywhere else. This is difficult for modern people to feel fully because we live surrounded by records. We can write instructions, draw maps, save names, keep calendars, preserve recipes, photograph places, and search for knowledge beyond our own minds. But deep in prehistory, before writing, before permanent records, before knowledge could be separated from the person who carried it, death could erase more than a voice. It could erase a route that no one else remembered well. It could erase the story of a plant that once saved people during hunger. It could erase the warning attached to a certain valley, the reason a certain shelter was avoided, the memory of when the animals last changed direction, or the small method for repairing a tool in a way younger hands had not yet learned. These losses would not always be visible at once, The group might continue moving, the fire might still burn, children might still be fed. Strong adults might still hunt, gather, carry, and protect. Life would not stop simply because one elder was gone. But sometime later, when a similar season returned, when a difficult choice appeared, when someone asked where the water had remained during the old dry year, there might be silence. That silence may have been the real cost. A person's memory can seem ordinary while they are alive because it is always there, available in small corrections and quiet comments. Only when it disappears does the group discover which parts of the past had been resting inside that person. This is one of the hidden reasons old people mattered. They carried knowledge that might not have been distributed evenly through the group. Some memories belonged to many people, others belonged to only one or two. A child may have heard a warning but not understood its importance. A young adult may have seen an elder prepare food but never learned the exact timing. A skilled person may have known one landscape well but not another. When an older person died, the group may have lost not just facts, but connections between facts. They may have lost the reason behind a habit. They may still remember that a place was avoided but not remember why. They may still copy a method but not understand which part was essential and which part could change. This is how knowledge thins. It does not always vanish all at once. It fades when the person who understood its deeper pattern is gone. We should be careful not to imagine every elder as the only keeper of wisdom. Human groups often share knowledge widely, and younger people learn, adapt, and create new solutions. Some old memories may have been wrong. Some older habits may have become less useful when the environment changed. The death of an elder did not mean a group was helpless, but it could mean that the group became a little poorer in time. It had fewer comparisons, fewer warnings, fewer remembered experiments, fewer voices connecting the present to what had happened before. In a world where knowledge was carried by living people, age gave knowledge more years to gather, but death placed that knowledge at risk. This may have made elders precious in a way that was both practical and emotional. They were loved, perhaps. They were needed, perhaps. They were sometimes difficult, dependent, or slow, but they were also living doors into earlier seasons of the group's existence. When one closed, the younger people had to carry forward whatever they had managed to receive. This gives the question of old people in prehistoric life a quieter weight. Their importance was not only in what they did while alive, it was also in what could disappear when they were gone. An old person near the fire may have seemed to be resting, watching, repeating old warnings, or telling things the young had heard before, but inside those repetitions was a fragile protection against forgetting. And in a world without written memory, forgetting could be dangerous. The question now returns to where it began. In prehistoric life, old age could look like weakness. An older person might need help with food, warmth, movement, or protection. They might no longer carry the heaviest loads or travel with the same ease as the young. At first glance, they seem to stand on the receiving side of care. But after looking more slowly, the picture becomes less simple. The old may have needed protection, but they also may have protected the group in ways that were harder to see. They protected children by watching, warning, correcting, and keeping danger from becoming injury. They protected young adults by preserving knowledge that strength alone could not create quickly. They protected mothers and fathers by widening the circle of care around the young. They protected the group's memory by carrying seasons, routes, mistakes, and recoveries that had not been written down anywhere else. They protected trust by showing that a human being did not lose all value when the body slowed. This kind of protection did not always look like standing in front of danger. It did not always look like a spear raised against an animal or a strong body carrying someone through difficult ground. Sometimes protection was quieter. It was the old voice that said, "Not that plant." It was the old hand that moved a child back from the fire. It was the memory that a certain valley had failed during a dry year. It was the calm presence that helped a frightened group wait until morning instead of moving into the dark. It was the repeated instruction that kept a small skill from disappearing. It was the warning that sounded ordinary until the day it mattered. In this sense, the The oldest people may have guarded the group from dangers that were not always visible yet. They guarded against forgetting. They guarded against panic. They guarded against waste. They guarded against children having to learn every danger through pain. They guarded against the group becoming so focused on immediate strength that it lost the deeper strength of continuity. This does not mean old people always held high status, or that every elder was listened to, or that every prehistoric group protected its older members in the same way. That would be too simple, and it would turn a careful question into a comforting myth. The ancient world was wide, harsh, and varied. Some elders may have been deeply valued, some may have struggled, some may have been supported by kin, while others may have faced hard limits when hunger or movement became severe. But the larger human pattern remains meaningful. A group that made room for older people was making room for time itself. It was allowing the past to remain close enough to speak. It was allowing children to grow not only under the strength of adults, but under the shadow of many remembered lives. It was allowing survival to become more than the effort of the strongest bodies today. The old person near the fire may have been protected by the group, but they may also have helped protect the group from becoming shallow in time. Without older memory, every generation stands closer to the edge of beginning again. With older memory, the group can carry forward what was learned before birth, before childhood, before the young were strong enough to understand why certain habits existed. So the paradox is not that weak people somehow mattered in a hard world. The deeper paradox is that a hard world may have made their slower kind of value more important. When life was uncertain, the group needed more than speed. It needed memory, care, caution, teaching, and emotional steadiness. And many of those things lived most naturally in people who had already survived long enough to become old. Modern life often teaches people to notice speed before depth. We notice who moves quickly, who produces more, who adapts fast, who stays useful in ways that can be counted. We measure work, time, output, strength, efficiency, and visible results. In such a world, old age can again begin to look like a problem. A slower body may be mistaken for a smaller life. A quieter voice may be mistaken for a voice that has nothing left to give. A person who no longer moves at the pace of the young may be treated as if they have stepped outside the center of life. But the prehistoric question asks us to slow down before accepting that view. If early human groups had valued only speed, strength, and immediate production, then old people would have had little place in the story. Yet the human story seems to have become wider than that. It made room, at least sometimes, for people whose value was carried in memory, caution, care, teaching, and emotional steadiness. This does not mean the past was kinder than the present. It does not mean prehistoric life should be romanticized. Ancient life was hard, uncertain, and often painful. But precisely because it was hard, it reminds us that usefulness has never had only one form. A person can matter without being the fastest. A person can protect others without standing at the front. A person can feed the future by remembering the past. This lesson has not disappeared. In the modern world, many older people still carry knowledge that cannot be fully replaced by speed. They remember how families endured difficult years. They remember old mistakes, old repairs, old places, old ways of saving, waiting, grieving, and beginning again. They may know the emotional history of a family, a community, or a place. They may understand the weight behind a habit that younger people see only as slowness. And sometimes, when the world becomes too loud, an older person's value is not in giving a quick answer, but in reminding others that not every problem has to be met with panic. This is close to the ancient pattern. A young person may bring energy, invention, and courage. An older person may bring comparison, restraint, and the memory of consequences. Neither replaces the other. A healthy human group, ancient or modern, needs both. It needs the strength to act and the memory to choose carefully. It needs the future pushing forward and the past whispering warnings from behind. The danger in modern life is that we often separate people by productivity and forget that human value is larger than output. We forget that children need more than devices, schools, and food. They need living examples of patience, aging, memory, and continuity. We forget that families and communities are not only built by those who can do the most in one day, but also by those who help others understand where they come from. The old person in a modern room may look far removed from the old person beside a prehistoric fire, but the deeper question is similar. What happens when a society stops listening to the people who have lived through more seasons? What happens when slowness is treated only as decline and not also as a possible keeper of attention? The educational value of the prehistoric question is not that we should idealize old age. Old people are human, varied, imperfect, and sometimes wrong. Age alone does not make wisdom, but age can hold experience, and experience can hold warnings that the young have not yet had time to earn. If we learn anything from thinking about old people in prehistoric life, perhaps it is that a human being should not be judged only by the strength they can show today. The slower years of life may still carry memory, care, and guidance. They may still protect others in ways that are quiet, ordinary, and easy to overlook. At the end of this long question, the meaning of old age in prehistoric life becomes quieter, but also deeper. Old people mattered not because every elder was strong, wise, or always listened to. That would be too simple. They mattered because human life itself was never built from strength alone. A group needed bodies that could move, hands that could work, eyes that could notice, and young energy that could carry the future forward. But it also needed memory. It needed people who had seen hunger before, who had watched children grow, who had learned which risks were worth taking and which were only impatience wearing the shape of courage. It needed someone to remember that a season can fail, that a shelter can deceive, that a plant can harm, that a frightened group can make poor choices, and that grief can be carried without letting the whole group fall apart. In a prehistoric world, where nothing was written down, older people could hold parts of the group that no object could hold for them. They could hold old roots, old warnings, old methods, old losses, and old recoveries. They could help children learn before pain became the teacher. They could help mothers, fathers, and younger adults carry the burden of care. They could help the group understand that survival was not only one strong day, but many remembered days placed together. And perhaps this is the quiet educational value of looking back at them. The old matter because time matters. A human being is not only valuable at the moment of greatest strength, highest speed, or most visible productivity. A person can matter because they have endured. A person can matter because they remember. A person can matter because their presence teaches the young that life has stages, and that no stage should be understood only by what it can produce in one day. Modern life often forgets this. It praises the new, the fast, the efficient, the measurable. It looks at the slowing body and sees decline before it sees memory. It hears repetition and misses the warning inside it. It sees dependence and forgets that every human life begins in dependence, and many human lives return to it. But prehistoric life, harsh as it was, asks us to look more carefully. If a small group living close to hunger could still find value in those who had grown old, then maybe value has always been larger than strength. Maybe the oldest people near the fire were not simply reminders of weakness. Maybe they were reminders that the group had lasted. They were living evidence that winters had passed before, that children had become adults before, that fear had been survived before, that the land had been learned slowly through mistakes, losses, and careful attention. Their lives told the young that survival was possible beyond the first shock of hardship. Their memories told the group that the present was not floating alone. It had roots, it had echoes, it had lessons carried from hands no longer moving. To honor that is not to pretend that old age is easy. Old age can bring pain, dependence, loneliness, and loss. It can also bring confusion, fear, and silence. But a truthful view of old age must hold both sides. The body may slow, and the life may still carry meaning. The hands may weaken, and the memory may still protect. The voice may grow quiet, and the group may still need what that voice has heard across many seasons. This is the final lesson the prehistoric question leaves behind. A human group becomes stronger not only when it feeds the young, but when it remembers the old. It becomes deeper when it allows knowledge to pass from those who have lived long to those who are still learning how to live. It becomes more human when it sees that care is not wasted simply because the return is not immediate. And as the fire lowers, as the night around the ancient camp becomes still, the oldest person sitting quietly nearby may no longer look like a burden. They may look like a doorway into everything the group has survived. So if even in prehistoric life, when food was uncertain and strength mattered every day, old people still had a place near the fire, what does that ask us to remember about the old people living beside us now?